Imagine a nightmare where doctors are monsters, testing the world's deadliest bacteria, viruses, and extremely lethal gases that turned entire villages and cities into ghost towns. Now stop imagining and wake up to reality. This is one of the ugliest true stories in medical history. Doctors and researchers meant to be saviors, transformed into monsters, and unleashed the most deadly biological and chemical weapons on innocent Chinese communities. This is the story of Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, headed by the infamous Surgeon General Shiro Ishii, a medical doctor and microbiologist. This account will focus only on testing biological and chemical weapons in Chinese communities and not on individual human subjects as lab rats. The latter is covered in a previous video. The first test is the vaccine of death. After producing cholera pathogens in large quantities and successfully testing them in laboratories using human subjects, which killed many, Dr. Ishii decided it was time to test them in large communities. So he descended upon Changchun in 1940. Ishii and his team arrived with an urgent false alarm that a cholera pandemic was fast approaching the city and that he had brought a life-saving vaccine. He also made it clear that the general population must be inoculated with his vaccine. But what he failed to tell the people was that he was lying, and secondly, the vaccine he intended to use was in fact a solution containing cholera bacteria. Desperate and afraid, the innocent people lined up and were given injections that would save them. Ishii also gave them food and drinks which probably might have been contaminated with the germs. Shortly after, the cholera epidemic spread like wildfire in Changchun. The disease ravaged the community, causing unimaginable pain and deaths. General Ishii and his accomplices celebrated their victory and reported the findings to their superior in the Imperial Army. 2. Nanking Expedition in 1942. Dr. Ishii went together with his most loyal and heartless disciples from Unit 731. The aim was to test typhoid and paratyphoid germs on the people of Nanking. Armed with metal flasks and glass bottles filled with the germs, he and his team moved through the city under the cover of darkness. They methodically dumped the lethal contents into wells, marshes, and even the homes of unsuspecting residents. Wells, which had been sources of life, became sources of death. Marshes, which provided sustenance, now harbored deadly pathogens. Homes, meant to be safe havens, became death traps. The people became ill and the disease ravaged their bodies, much to the delight of the researchers. One would think Ishii and his agents of death would pack their belongings and return to Pingfan, the headquarters of Unit 731, and celebrate their evil victory. But that's not what happened. They had other deadly plans in store for this humble community. 2 nearby camps that housed thousands of Chinese prisoners of war were also part of Ishii's grand plans. He went to these camps with a convincing deception that brought happiness and tears of joy to the faces of the freedom fighters. However, unknown to them, it would lead to the worst experiences of their lives and those of their families. Ishii brought along 130 kilograms of typhoid germs and an unknown large quantity of anthrax bacteria. 3,000 prisoners of war were given dumplings that had been contaminated with typhoid or paratyphoid germs. The prisoners were then released and sent home to their families. With happy faces and pockets filled with dumplings, these poor souls served as unwitting agents for spreading the diseases to their wives and children. For the young kids who came to witness the release of the heroes, Ishii prepared an unusual treat. He gave them chocolate bars laced with anthrax bacteria. The kids happily ate the chocolates, but soon went home with terrible sickness. The kids were not the only ones affected. Everyone who attended the event had one or more devilish delicacies to eat and some to take home. You would think this was all, but it was not. Sweet cakes infused with typhoid and paratyphoid bacteria were another of Ishii's deadly confections during the Nanking expedition. Japanese soldiers were given about 400 of these cakes and instructed to leave them near fences and by trees, creating the illusion that they had been forgotten in a hasty retreat. It was expected that the local population, always short of food, would eagerly consume the abandoned Japanese provisions. As anticipated, an outbreak of the disease occurred shortly afterward. In another Chinese community, Dr. Ishii devised a new, sinister plan to unleash devastation on a massive scale. This time, His weapon of choice was not a syringe or food but an army of rats carrying plague-infected fleas to densely populated areas. Plague is a highly infectious and deadly disease man has ever encountered. Under the cover of the night, Ishii's operatives released thousands of rats into Chinese communities. The rodents, each a tiny mobile vessel of death, scurried through alleys, homes, and the marketplace. With terrifying efficiency, fleas carrying the deadly plague leaped from their hosts to unsuspecting victims. The result of this devilish ingenuity was an outbreak of plague that killed many people. In another cruel and calculated scheme, the men of Unit 731 attacked yet another community. They embedded deadly germs into specially designed walking sticks and fountain pens, transforming these everyday objects into weapons of mass infection. These contaminated items were then strategically scattered along dirt paths and paved roads, waiting for an unsuspecting victim to pick them up. Imagine a poor farmer walking home after a long day in the fields, his eyes catching the glint of a seemingly abandoned walking stick lying by the roadside. Thinking it a lucky find, he takes it home, unaware that this simple act of curiosity would unleash a torrent of suffering. The germs encrusted within the walking stick find their way into his household, infecting not only him but also his wife and children. The family, already struggling with the hardships of their daily life, is now besieged by a mysterious and deadly illness. Or picture a curious child, playing along a well-trodden path, stumbling upon a shiny fountain pen. The pen, a rare and precious item in those times, becomes a prized possession. The child brings it home, proudly showing it off to their parents. Unbeknownst to them, the pen carries a hidden payload of disease. The bacteria spread silently, swiftly, from the pen to the child, then to the entire family. What started as a moment of joy quickly turned into a nightmare of fever, pain, and death. This method of biological warfare was particularly heinous because it preyed on the innocent and the vulnerable. The men of Unit 731 knew that in times of scarcity and war, any useful object found by the roadside would likely be picked up and taken home. The aftermath was predictable and tragic. Entire families fell ill, violent diseases devastated villages, and the death toll rose. Next, the train of death. In July 1940, Ishii sent a heavily guarded train to Hangzhou, carrying 70 kilograms of typhoid bacteria, 50 kilograms of cholera germs, and 5 kilograms of plague-infected fleas. The target was Ningbo. For the next few months, Ningbo and neighboring communities endured relentless biological weapons attacks. Various methods were used to spread the diseases, each designed for maximum devastation. The pathogens were turned into solutions and dumped into reservoirs, ponds, and family wells. People unknowingly drank the contaminated water, leading to widespread illness and death. In October, grains of wheat and millet were infected and disseminated by aerial spraying. Specially designed Unit 731 aircraft flew over farmlands and villages, releasing the infected grains from above. The grains settled into the soil and mixed with the local crops. Farmers harvested and consumed the contaminated produce, spreading the diseases further. The unsuspecting population found their staple food sources turned into deadly vectors of infection. The most visually dramatic method involved bombs dropped by Unit 731 aircraft. These bombs, upon impact, released smoke-like objects that soon turned a light yellow color. The eerie transformation signaled the release of deadly pathogens into the air. The resulting outbreaks were swift and deadly, causing panic and chaos among the affected communities. The long-term effects were catastrophic. The plague ravaged Ningbo and nearby communities in 1941 and resurfaced in 1947, with high casualties each time. In November 1941, Oda, Ishii's loyal and trusted friend, dispatched an airplane that circled Chengta. It dropped a mixture of wheat and rice balls, strips of colored paper, cotton fibers, and other fabric cuttings. A week later, an 11-year-old girl died of plague. By December, many Chengta residents were dead of plague. Unit 731 distributed plague-infected fleas throughout rice and wheat fields in another expedition. They also scattered pathogens along paths leading to villages. A few weeks later, the plague spread throughout the region. More than 300 inhabitants died from the disease and many more became ill. The remaining survivors, more than 5,000 families, were forced to flee as the Japanese set the entire villages in the region on fire. The deliberate and multifaceted approach to spreading disease showcased the ruthlessness and ingenuity of Unit 731. Each method was carefully planned to exploit the vulnerabilities of the local population, ensuring maximum suffering and death. Before testing the pathogens in these large communities, Unit 731 used humans as lab rats to test these deadly diseases. They also performed horrific experiments. To watch the video that describes these horrific experiments and using human subjects as lab rats, click here.